7:45 in the morning. It's a quarter before 8 o'clock. Marshall Chriswell is here, and it's another installment of Martial Law. This program intended for informational purposes only. The information does not constitute legal advice. The law constantly changes. The information may not be complete or correct depending on the date, your particular legal problem. Each legal problem depends on its individual facts, and different jurisdictions have different laws and regulations. Because of that, you should not act or rely on any information in this segment without seeking the advice of a competent attorney licensed to practice law in your jurisdiction for your particular problem. That guy across the microphone from me, he's got one of those. Morning.
Good morning.
Marshall Chriswell is with us once again. So we were talking a couple of moments ago before we began this segment about some different topics of conversation. One was something somebody asked me to ask you the next time I saw you, and that had to do with class action lawsuits. You get all kinds of notifications. You see them on TV. As you said, you get them in emails. Would you like to join a class action lawsuit? Number one, what does that mean was their question. And number two, how do I qualify? And number three, is it a big old scam?
Sure. It's a great question, and you're right. You see it all the time. So I guess the initial question is, okay, what is a class action lawsuit? And the law provides that if multiple plaintiffs, if multiple people are harmed in a similar way, or can allege harm in a similar harm from an identical defendant, then in most cases, in some cases, they can bring a class action lawsuit. Okay, so this is a situation where, let's say it's a product liability. All right, so you've purchased something that was defective in some way, or was potentially dangerous. It was a product liability suit. You can join together all the plaintiffs that purchased or used that product, and they can all sue together. And the reason that the law allows you to do that is because if just one plaintiff was going to sue, a lot of times it wouldn't make sense financially for that plaintiff to do that, or for an attorney to take the case, to bring the case. So it holds, generally the policy behind it is it holds large companies accountable when they create a product or do something else that causes harm to many plaintiffs. And it gives a mechanism to do that, because if class action lawsuits weren't allowed, then in some instances those corporations, those large companies, could get away with what they're doing, because it doesn't make sense for one individual plaintiff to come forward and bring a separate lawsuit. So
most famous recently, the Takata airbag would be one of those types of things.
Absolutely. And so, yeah, everybody that had one of those in their vehicle can join a class action lawsuit, and it puts pressure on the company to settle it on favorable terms for the consumer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So they get these notifications, and they say to themselves, I don't have the expertise to decide if I should join a class action lawsuit. I don't know what I'm supposed to do.
Right.
Usually there's a phone number attached to it, or something like that.
Sure, you can, and that's one option. You can call the number. You'll be connected with generally the attorney, one of the attorneys that are handling cases for plaintiffs in the class action lawsuit. Connect with their firm or a representative from their firm to discuss it. You can also just, more and more, you're getting them via email or even in the mail with just a link, just a URL to a website that you can go on and say, okay, I want to join the class action lawsuit, and even put in, here are the dates that I purchased the product approximately. Mm-hmm. Here's what which product it was particularly, and even put in claims for a refund if there's been a settlement that's already been reached. Because a lot of times that's what the settlement is. It provides refund for those products if it wasn't something super dangerous.
Yeah, it's not something that it usually ends up going into a courtroom. It's one of those that is settled out of court for a very large amount of money.
Yeah, most of the time.
Possibly.
Yeah, and we've talked about civil litigation on this show quite a bit. And the same rules apply to class action lawsuits. Those are a type of civil litigation. And 9 out of 10 civil litigation cases, civil cases, settle out of court. You may have motions that are brought before the judge, you have pleadings, and there may be some hearings and things, but to go to a full-blown trial, most civil cases are going to settle before that.
Now, there's another type of activity, that consumer law right there. Several years ago, and maybe even more recently than several years ago, class action lawsuits brought on behalf of people who claim harm from the emissions from power plants around these parts. Do they make the rounds in local law legal circles before some national firm or some big law firm in some other city might grab them and turn them into a class action lawsuit? Because there have been those sorts of lawsuits affecting people around here.
Yeah, and that's interesting. That's certainly one way that class actions can percolate. Okay, you get multiple cases happening all over a region or even all over the country, and then at some point it becomes evident that there are a lot of people that were affected by an action of a company or whatever entity, and then those plaintiffs start to join together, and sometimes they can all have different attorneys, but the point is that they join together as part of a class action, all under one lawsuit.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so if someone has a feeling that they are involved in some case, that they have a case.
Mm-hmm.
They're feeling, I have a case against this company, this entity of some sort. Obviously, your first stop should be the local attorney, and get the consultation with that local attorney to figure out, okay, is there something here? Should I move forward, and how do I move forward?
Right. And if you get a notice that you are potentially part of a class action lawsuit, you're a potential plaintiff in a class action suit, then you're part of the class, is what they say. Usually you have the option to opt out if you want to do that. Mm-hmm. And it's important to think about that, because if you stay as part of the class, then you are you're limited to the settlement or the verdict in that case. Mm-hmm. But if you opt out and say, okay, I don't want to be part of this class, my circumstances are much different than mm-hmm. the rest of the class because I was more gravely injured or whatever it is, then you can bring a separate suit if you opt out. But mm-hmm. you have a certain amount of time, as with everything in law. Okay, there's going to be, and each case can be a little different, but you're going to have a certain amount of time with which to opt out. The other thing is, when you're receiving these emails saying, okay, you're part of a class action lawsuit, you want to make sure that those are actual, that those are authentic mm-hmm. Before clicking on links and providing information, because there are plenty of scammers out there who have discovered, oh, well, this is a good way to, telling somebody that they could potentially be getting a settlement mm-hmm. or a refund of some sort as part of a class action is a great way to scam them into giving us personal information.
I would guess that the legitimacy of something like that really is a demand for you to get somebody local that to represent you.
Yeah, well, at least consult with somebody to say, okay, can you tell me whether this is a legitimate case? Mm-hmm. All right, because and then an attorney's going to be able to check the court docket and say, okay, yes, this is a legitimate case. These case numbers match up, and either help you through the process or point you in the right direction.
Are those types of cases more prevalent in federal courts or in state courts or local courts?
Federal courts. Federal courts. Yeah, there are. Most class action lawsuits take place in federal court.
Mm-hmm. And the judges have a lot of power to determine whether a suit can go forward in that case, can't they?
They do, within the confines of case law and appellate court precedent and, mm-hmm. and things, but they do. As in all civil cases, you get before the judge and they're the ones that make final decisions about, whether a case is dismissed or it moves forward or what happens in a trial, whether certain evidence is permitted to be admitted into evidence and all those things. So judges definitely hold a lot of those keys. And so that's why we talk about most of these cases settle, because there is often uncertainty there. You know, you can settle on terms that everybody can live with, or you can put a case, you can take a case to trial in front of a judge who's going to make a decision that maybe nobody's going to like.
You can roll the dice in that way.
Yeah.
How often, when you are taking a civil case, do you get before a judge in the preliminary rounds, if you will, and the judge gives you advice as an attorney to say, this is what you're going to run, this is the roadblock you're going to run into, I would advise you in this way or that, as to how to proceed? Yeah,
a judge is not going to give, generally not going to give legal advice to the attorneys, one side or the other, and certainly can't have a conversation with, can't have what we call an ex parte conversation with one party or one party's attorney without everybody else in the case present and for that. But what a judge will do is say, this is the way that I view the law. And these are the procedures in my courtroom. You know, based on that, you know, this is a likely decision that I'm going to make. This is the way I'm leaning. And sometimes a judge will tell you. Sometimes a judge plays it more close to the vest and doesn't. But sometimes he'll say, he or she will say, you know, I'm leaning this way. And it's possible that you could come in on this hearing or for a trial and you can convince me otherwise, but this is the way I'm leaning. So go tell your clients that and let's get this resolved.
And both sides are going to be present when that conversation is held?
Always.
Always.
Yes.
All right. So he's Marshall Chriswell. This is pretty good advice that we're hearing here today, or just says it's not legal advice. At any rate, if people do want to talk with you about class action lawsuits, civil law as a whole, bringing a case before a judge, what need they to do?
Need to call me at 724-465-5826. Find me online at www.westernpalawyer.com or stop by and see us in the Atrium building here in downtown Indiana.
He is Marshall Chriswell. Happy Thanksgiving.
You as well.
It is Indiana in the Morning.